Lila had always known that her life in the tribe was going to be different. From the moment she was born, she was marked as someone special. The elders in her tribe saw something in her. Perhaps it was her sharp mind or her inquisitive nature. But whatever it was, Lila was expected to be someone who would one day help lead their people. She grew up learning their customs and listening to their stories, a life filled with traditions passed down for generations. The tribe was more than just a community. It was a family, a safe haven where everyone knew each other and the bond between them was sacred. But Lila was not like the other girls in her tribe. While they learned how to gather herbs, tend to the fire, and take care of the children, Lila spent most of her time questioning. She often asked why when the elders spoke about the old ways. She wondered about life beyond the borders of the forest, beyond the mountains that stood like silent sentinels. She had dreams of exploring the world, seeing more than what was laid out before her in the village. She would sneak away sometimes when no one was looking, to the edge of the forest to watch the sun dip behind the distant hills. It was there, in those moments of solitude, that Lila felt free. However, freedom came at a cost. Her curiosity did not sit well with the tribe's leaders. The rules were clear. Everyone was expected to adhere to the customs and practices without question. No one dared challenge the sacred traditions. Lila, however, couldn't help herself. She wanted more. Her desire to explore beyond what she knew made her stand out, and not always in a good way. It all came to a head one fateful day when Lila did something that would change her life forever. The tribe had a rule about the harvest ceremony, a special event where every member of the tribe had to contribute to the celebration. The harvest was a sacred time, when the people would gather the fruits of their labor and give thanks to the spirits who blessed them with such bounty. The ritual was not to be taken lightly, and everyone was expected to follow it to the letter. On the day of the harvest, Lila found herself standing at the edge of the ceremony, watching the others perform their roles with reverence. But something inside her rebelled. The ritual felt restrictive, suffocating. She couldn't stand the idea of simply following orders, of taking part in something she didn't fully believe in. Instead of joining the others in the traditional dance around the fire, Lila slipped away, finding herself at the foot of the mountain. There she sat alone, away from everyone, watching the sky as the stars began to twinkle above. When the elders found out she had not followed the ceremony, they were furious. They viewed Lila's actions as an affront to their sacred traditions, a dangerous sign of defiance. To them, it wasn't just an act of rebellion, it was an act that threatened the unity of the tribe. They called a council of elders to decide what should be done. Lila, who had once been regarded with favor, was now seen as a problem. Her disobedience was considered disrespectful, and a sign that she was no longer loyal to the tribe's values. Lila tried to explain herself, to tell them that she didn't mean to hurt anyone or disrespect their beliefs. She told them that she had no intention of abandoning the tribe, but that she simply couldn't keep following traditions that felt wrong to her. But the elders didn't listen. They had their own way of seeing things, and they believed Lila's defiance could not be ignored. The tribe was too small, too fragile to allow anyone to break the rules without consequences. After long hours of heated discussion, the decision was made. Lila was to be cast out of the tribe. It was a punishment that shocked everyone, but no one dared to challenge the decision. It was a harsh punishment, one that would mean exile, loneliness, and a life filled with uncertainty. In the eyes of the tribe, she was no longer one of them. She had been abandoned, left to wander in the wilderness, alone with no protection, no family, and no home. When the elders informed Lila of their decision, her heart sank. The words stung, and for the first time she felt truly alone. The tribe, the people who had once been her family, were no longer a part of her life. They had turned their backs on her. Lila's thoughts raced as she realized the gravity of the situation. She had nowhere to go. The forest was vast and the mountains were dangerous. Her heart began to race as panic set in. What would she do now? How would she survive on her own? As the elders prepared to send her away, they offered no support, no guidance, no kindness. They told her she was free to leave, to find her own way in the world. But to Lila, this freedom felt like a heavy burden. She was terrified. There was no place for her now, no familiar faces, no warm fires to sit by. She was a stranger in her own world. With nothing more than a small bundle of belongings, Lila walked away from the village. Her steps were slow, heavy with the weight of everything she had lost. She looked back one last time at the village, the place that had been her home for so long, and she realized she would never return. She was on her own now. The thought terrified her, but she had no choice. The path ahead was uncertain, filled with unknown dangers, but Lila had no other option but to face it. She wiped away her tears, took a deep breath, and started walking. As she moved further into the forest, the sounds of the village faded into the distance. It felt like the world was closing in on her, like the trees and the sky were swallowing her whole. She had no idea what the future would hold, but one thing was certain. She had no choice but to keep moving forward. For days, Lila wandered through the wilderness, her mind clouded with confusion, fear, and sadness. She had no food, no water, and no idea where she was going. Every sound in the forest made her jump. Every shadow seemed like a threat. She had never been alone like this before, and the loneliness was overwhelming. But with every step, Lila knew she had to keep going. There was no other choice. There was only survival. Lila walked alone, with the weight of her past pressing heavily on her shoulders. The forest seemed endless, stretching out in every direction like an ocean of trees. It felt as though the world had swallowed her whole, and she was the only one left. With each step she took, the noise of the tribe, the familiar faces, and the laughter of children faded into the background. There was only the sound of her own footsteps echoing in the silence. The feeling of isolation crept over her like a shadow that wouldn't let go. For the first few days, Lila kept moving. She didn't know where she was going or if she was even heading in the right direction. But something inside her told her to keep walking. She thought that maybe, just maybe, there would be someone out there. Someone who could offer her help. Someone who might understand her plight. But as the days went by, it became clear that the forest didn't care. It was a vast, uncaring place, and there were no answers to be found. She struggled to find food. The forest, which had once seemed full of life, now felt like a dangerous maze. Every plant she touched seemed unfamiliar, and she wasn't sure which ones were safe to eat. She tried to fish in the stream that ran nearby, but her hands trembled with hunger, and it felt impossible to catch anything. The pangs of hunger gnawed at her stomach, and she realized just how unprepared she was for life outside the tribe. At night, the darkness seemed even deeper than usual, and Lila would find a small patch of earth to curl up on, wrapping herself in the thin blanket she had carried with her. But even the blanket couldn't protect her from the cold. The nights were long and lonely, and the silence pressed in on her. Sometimes she would hear the sounds of distant animals rustling in the underbrush, or the eerie hoot of an owl in the trees. She would stay awake for hours, her thoughts racing, unable to shut them out. She wondered what had happened to the people she had known all her life. Had they forgotten about her? Had they ever really cared? Despite the exhaustion and the fear, Lila kept moving. She couldn't afford to stop. She had no idea where she was headed. But she knew that staying in one place would only make her weaker. She needed to find food. She needed shelter. But most of all, she needed to survive. After a week of wandering, Lila's hope began to fade. She had passed through thick forests and crossed rocky streams, but there was no sign of civilization. She felt as though the world had turned its back on her. The weight of her situation felt heavier than ever. She was alone, and with each passing day, she became weaker and more fragile. Her legs ached, her stomach growled in protest, and her mind grew clouded with despair. It was then, in the midst of her exhaustion, that Lila heard something. It was faint at first, just a rustling sound in the distance, but as she strained her ears to listen, she could tell that it wasn't the normal rustling of wind or animals. This was different. It was the sound of someone walking. Lila's heart skipped a beat. Could it be someone who could help her? She stood still for a moment, unsure of whether to approach or to hide. But her curiosity got the better of her. She needed help, and she couldn't afford to waste this chance. With cautious steps, Lila made her way toward the sound. She parted the bushes slowly, peering through the trees. What she saw made her heart race. A man was walking through the woods alone. He was tall, with broad shoulders and rough, calloused hands. His clothes were simple, made of rough fabric, and he carried a small bundle over his shoulder. Lila watched him from behind the trees, unsure of what to do next. He didn't seem like someone from her tribe, and his presence here was a mystery. The man was walking with purpose, his eyes scanning the ground as though searching for something. He didn't notice Lila at first, but when he finally did, his expression was one of surprise. His eyes widened for a moment as he saw her standing there, thin and ragged, her face gaunt from days of travel. Lila's heart beat faster as she took a step back, but the man didn't seem hostile. Instead, he tilted his head, studying her quietly. "Are you lost?" he asked in a deep voice that was calm yet filled with curiosity. Lila hesitated. She didn't know who this man was or if she could trust him, but in her heart, she knew that she couldn't survive much longer on her own. She nodded slowly, feeling the weight of her words. "Yes," she replied, her voice hoarse from thirst and hunger. "I don't know where to go." The man didn't say anything at first. He just looked at her, his expression unreadable. For a moment, Lila wondered if he was going to leave her there, alone again in the forest. But then to her surprise, he spoke. "Come with me," he said simply. "I'll help you." Lila didn't know what to think. The man was a stranger, and yet something about him seemed trustworthy. She had no other options, no other choice. She could either trust him or continue on alone in the woods. So with a sense of cautious hope, Lila followed him. The man led her through the forest, moving with ease as if he knew the path by heart. Lila struggled to keep up, her legs still aching from the long journey. As they walked, the man didn't speak much, but he occasionally glanced over his shoulder to make sure she was still following. Eventually, they came to a small clearing where the man had set up camp. There was a small fire burning in the center, and a pot of stew simmering over the flames. Lila's stomach growled at the smell of the food, and she suddenly realized just how hungry she truly was. The man gestured for her to sit by the fire. "Eat," he said, offering her a wooden bowl filled with the stew. "It's not much, but it'll help you." Lila took the bowl gratefully, her hands trembling as she brought it to her lips. The warmth of the food and the fire seemed to bring her back to life. For the first time in what felt like forever, she allowed herself to relax, to feel safe for a moment. The man watched her quietly as she ate, his expression softening. "My name's James," he said after a while. "I live on a farm not far from here." Lila looked up from her bowl, surprised by his words. A farm? She had never heard of anyone living this far out in the forest. She wondered if this was some kind of dream, or if the man was just being kind because he pitied her. But whatever the reason, Lila felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, she had found someone who could help her start over, someone who wouldn't judge her for the past she was trying to escape. The next few days passed in a blur for Lila. James, the man she had met in the woods, seemed like a stranger at first, but his kindness and quiet strength gave her something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. The life he lived, though simple, seemed to be filled with a kind of peace that Lila desperately needed. Every morning, James would wake early, tend to his small farm, and then return to their campfire to make a meal. It was a routine that comforted Lila, though she couldn't help but feel like an outsider in his world. She spent the early days simply recovering. The food, though simple, nourished her body, and the warmth of the fire at night gave her the rest she so badly needed. But after a while, she could sense that there was more to James than met the eye. He was quiet, not one to share much about himself. He had mentioned living alone on the farm, but Lila had no idea what his life had been like before they met. He didn't ask about her past either. It was as if they were both choosing to leave their histories behind and live in the present moment. One evening, as the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, James stood up from his place by the fire and gestured to the forest. "Come with me," he said. His voice was calm, but there was something in his tone that made Lila curious. She followed him, walking silently through the woods. They reached a small clearing where the grass was soft underfoot. A few chickens clucked in the distance, and the smell of fresh earth filled the air. In the center of the clearing stood a small wooden hut, its roof covered in moss, surrounded by rows of crops that looked carefully tended. "This is my home," James said, turning to face Lila. "I live here alone, but it's enough for me. I grow my own food, raise animals, and keep to myself." Lila looked around, taking in the simplicity of it all. There was something calming about the place, something that made her feel like for the first time since she had been cast out, she was truly welcome. James wasn't offering her sympathy or pity. Instead, he was offering her a chance at a new life. It was more than she could have hoped for when she had first wandered into the forest. For the next few days, Lila worked alongside James. It was hard at first. Her body still ached from her long journey, and she wasn't used to the physical labor that farming required. But James was patient with her, showing her how to plant seeds, water the crops, and tend to the animals. He explained each task with care, always encouraging her to take her time and learn at her own pace. "You'll get the hang of it," he would say with a quiet smile whenever she made a mistake. "Don't rush." Lila began to find a rhythm in the work. The simple tasks like pulling weeds from the garden or gathering eggs from the chickens gave her a sense of accomplishment. As the days turned into weeks, Lila found herself growing stronger, not just physically but mentally. She began to feel like she was part of something again. Though the work was hard, it wasn't a burden. It was a way to rebuild her life, one small step at a time. James continued to be a steady presence in her life. He never pushed her to talk about her past, but he also didn't shy away from quiet moments where she could share if she wanted to. She told him bits and pieces of her story, about her tribe, her family, and how she had been cast out. But even as she spoke, Lila knew that she was leaving much unsaid. The pain of being abandoned, of losing everything she had known, was still raw. Yet with each passing day, that pain seemed a little easier to bear. James didn't judge her. He didn't see her as the girl who had been thrown away by her tribe. He saw her for who she was now, a woman trying to rebuild her life. One evening, after a long day of work, Lila sat by the fire, staring into the flames. James sat beside her, his gaze fixed on the stars above. It was a peaceful moment, and for the first time in a long time, Lila felt truly at ease. "You're not like other people," Lila said quietly. Breaking the silence, James turned to her, a small smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "How do you mean?" "You don't judge," Lila continued. "I've been judged my whole life by the people in my tribe. But here it's different. You don't make me feel like I'm broken or worthless. You just let me be." James looked at her thoughtfully before speaking. "Everyone has their own story," he said, his voice low. "I don't need to know your past to know that you deserve kindness. We all do." Lila was taken aback by his words. She had never heard anyone speak like that before, especially not someone from her tribe. In the tribe, people were always concerned with status, with tradition, with making sure everyone followed the rules. But James wasn't like that. He didn't care about her past, her mistakes, or her lineage. He only cared about who she was in the present moment, and that was something she had never experienced before. As the weeks passed, Lila's feelings toward James began to change. At first, she had seen him as a kind stranger who had helped her in her time of need. But now she realized that she admired him in a way she couldn't quite explain. There was something about his quiet strength, his unwavering kindness, that made her feel safe in a way she hadn't felt in years. One evening, as they sat by the fire, James turned to her with a thoughtful expression on his face. "Lila," he said, his voice gentle, "I know this is all new for you and I don't want to pressure you. But I've been thinking, I have a small farm here, and it's a lot of work for one person. I could use some help, and I want you to know that if you want to stay here, you're welcome to. I don't expect anything from you, but I think you'd be good here helping with the farm. I'd be honored to have you stay." Lila's heart skipped a beat. The offer was simple, yet it meant so much to her. She had been on her own for so long, feeling lost and abandoned. But now James was offering her something she had longed for, a sense of belonging. She didn't know what the future would hold, but for the first time, she felt like she had a place where she was wanted, where she wasn't just a castaway. As she looked into James's eyes, she realized that the decision was hers to make. She could choose to stay and build a new life with him, or she could continue wandering. It was a decision she knew she had to make carefully. But deep down she knew that this was a chance she couldn't let slip away. She had been abandoned once before, but now she was being given an opportunity to start fresh, to build something real. With a soft smile, Lila nodded. "I'd like that," she said quietly. "I'd like to stay." And in that moment, both of them knew that their lives were about to change in ways neither of them could have ever imagined. The days turned into weeks and then into months. Lila's life on the farm with James began to take on a rhythm, a quiet routine that slowly felt like home. At first, the work was hard. She wasn't used to the physical labor of farm life, and the days felt long, filled with chores she had never done before. But with James by her side, teaching her with patience and never rushing her, Lila slowly adapted. Each day they worked together in the fields. They planted vegetables, tended to the animals, and gathered fruit from the trees. There was always something that needed to be done, and James made sure that Lila had a chance to learn everything he knew. At first she was clumsy, making mistakes along the way, but James never scolded her. Instead, he encouraged her to keep trying, telling her that mistakes were just part of the learning process. "You'll get it," he said with a gentle smile. "It's like anything. The more you do it, the easier it becomes." As time passed, Lila grew stronger. Her arms became more toned from carrying baskets of fresh produce, and her hands, once soft and delicate, now had calluses from working the land. She wasn't the same person she had been when she first arrived at the farm, unsure and fragile. She had learned not only how to survive, but how to thrive. The work, although tiring, gave her a sense of pride. She was building something with her own two hands, something that mattered. James was always there, quietly helping and guiding her. They spent their days working side by side, often without speaking much. But there was something comforting in the silence, a peaceful companionship that didn't require constant words. Over time, Lila began to look forward to their moments together, whether it was harvesting the crops in the early morning or sitting by the fire at night, sharing a meal they had both worked to create. One evening, after a long day of tending to the fields, Lila found herself sitting outside, gazing up at the sky. The stars were clear and bright, and she felt a strange peace in the quiet of the night. She hadn't realized how much she had missed this kind of stillness, the feeling of being safe, of not having to constantly worry about what came next. The farm, with its simple way of life, had become a refuge for her. It wasn't just a place to live. It was a place to heal. James came to sit beside her, his presence calm as always. He didn't say anything at first, but Lila could sense that he was thinking about something. After a moment he spoke, his voice quiet but filled with meaning. "Lila, I'm glad you're here," he said, looking at her with an expression that was both kind and sincere. "I've never had anyone to share this farm with. It's been just me for so long, but having you here, it feels different, better." Lila turned to him, surprised by his words. She had never really stopped to think about how her presence might have affected him. After all, she had come to the farm out of necessity, fleeing from her past and looking for a way to survive. She had never expected to find anything more than a place to stay, a temporary solution to her problems. But here with James, it felt like something more. She had a sense of belonging, a feeling that she hadn't realized she was missing until now. "I feel the same way," she said softly. "When I first came here, I was lost. I didn't know what I was doing or where I was going. But now I can't imagine leaving. I feel like I'm finally where I'm supposed to be." James smiled, and for the first time, Lila saw a flicker of something in his eyes, something deeper than the quiet kindness he had shown her before. It was as if he too had found something in their partnership that he hadn't realized he was searching for. They sat in silence for a while longer, watching the stars and feeling the weight of their words settle between them. As the days passed, Lila's bond with James continued to grow. They were no longer just two people working side by side. They were becoming a team, a partnership built on trust, respect, and the simple joys of shared labor. It wasn't a romantic connection at first. There was no rush or pressure to define what was between them. But over time, their friendship deepened. They became more than just a farmer and a helper. They became companions, two people who had found comfort and solace in each other's company. Lila noticed small changes in herself as well. Her confidence, which had once been shattered by her abandonment, slowly returned. She had started to take pride in her work, knowing that she was contributing to the farm and to James's life in meaningful ways. The farm was no longer just a place of survival. It had become a place of growth for both of them. Lila realized that the longer she stayed, the more she felt like a part of something, a family, even if it was just the two of them. One afternoon, while they were working together in the garden, Lila glanced over at James. He was focused on the task at hand, his brow furrowed in concentration. For the first time, Lila truly saw him, not just as the man who had offered her shelter, but as someone who had quietly become an important part of her life. She stopped what she was doing and asked him a question that had been on her mind for a while. "James," she began hesitantly, "why did you help me? When you found me in the forest, why did you bring me here? You didn't even know me." James paused, wiping the sweat from his brow before turning to face her. There was a moment of silence, and for a brief second, Lila felt her heart race, unsure of what his answer would be. But then he spoke, his voice steady. "I saw someone in need," he said simply. "I didn't need to know your whole story to see that you were lost. I've lived a quiet life, but I know what it feels like to be alone. I couldn't just leave you out there. No one should have to face that kind of loneliness." Lila's heart softened. His words struck something deep within her, and for the first time, she felt truly seen, not as the girl who had been abandoned by her tribe, but as a person worthy of kindness and care. The days continued to pass and their bond grew stronger. They worked together, laughed together, and shared moments of quiet companionship. Lila felt a peace she hadn't known in years. For so long she had been defined by what she had lost, the tribe that had cast her out, the life she had been forced to leave behind. But now, in this quiet corner of the world, she was beginning to see herself differently. She wasn't just someone who had been abandoned. She was someone who had found a new beginning, a chance to build something from the ground up with her own hands and with someone who cared about her. James, too, seemed to change in small ways. He became more open, more willing to share parts of his past, and Lila began to understand the man who had quietly offered her a fresh start. They weren't just working the land together, they were building a life one small step at a time. It was a life that neither of them had expected, but it was one they both cherished. And as they sat by the fire each evening, sharing stories and dreams for the future, Lila knew that this was only the beginning of a new chapter in both their lives. As the seasons changed, so did the bond between Lila and James. Their lives, once separate, had now intertwined in ways neither of them had expected. The farm had become a place not only for growing food but for growing themselves, both as individuals and as a team. The simple everyday moments that they shared began to form the foundation of something deep and lasting. There was no rush, no urgency to define what they were, but there was a quiet understanding that they had found something rare and valuable in each other. Lila had learned to appreciate the rhythm of farm life. The mornings, when the sun was still low and the air crisp, were spent gathering eggs from the chickens, milking the cows, and tending to the fields. By noon, the work slowed down and they would share a meal together, simple but hearty food, prepared with ingredients grown right on the farm. The afternoons were often spent repairing fences or picking vegetables, and in the evenings after the work was done, they would sit by the fire and talk, sometimes about nothing at all, other times about their dreams for the future, and occasionally about the past they had left behind. Lila's thoughts often drifted back to the time before she had found this life with James. She remembered the tribe, the customs and the rules that had once defined her existence. She had been raised to believe in the importance of tradition, in the strength of community. But when it had come to her own happiness, those very traditions had felt like chains, holding her in place. Now in this quiet farm life, she had found the freedom she had longed for. It wasn't the freedom to wander without purpose. It was the freedom to live authentically, to make choices that were her own and to shape her future based on what felt right for her. James, too, had changed. He was no longer the quiet, solitary man who had first offered her help. There was a warmth in him now, a spark that came from the connection they had built together. He still had his moments of silence, but now those moments didn't feel lonely. They felt like space for reflection, a chance to gather thoughts before sharing them. Lila had come to understand him in ways she hadn't before. He wasn't just a farmer or a kind stranger. He was someone who had lived through his own struggles and had learned to find peace in the quiet of his own company. But more than that, he had a quiet strength that Lila admired. He knew how to give without expecting anything in return, how to create a life from the ground up, and how to make someone feel seen and valued. One evening, as they sat by the fire, James turned to Lila, his expression thoughtful. It was a calm, ordinary evening, the kind they had shared many times before, but this time, there was something in the air that felt different. "Lila," he began, his voice steady but soft, "I've been thinking a lot lately about the future, about what comes next." Lila looked at him, her heart beating a little faster. She had always wondered what James saw for himself in the future. For so long, it had just been the two of them, working side by side, taking each day as it came. But now, as they sat there, she realized that the future they had built together wasn't just about surviving. It was about living. Living with purpose, with connection, and with a shared vision of what they wanted their lives to be. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice gentle. James took a deep breath, and for a moment Lila saw a flicker of vulnerability in his eyes. It was a side of him that she hadn't seen much. Before, the quiet man who usually kept his thoughts close now seemed to be searching for the right words. "I'm not just talking about the farm," he said finally. "I'm talking about us. I've come to realize that since you've been here, I've felt more alive than I have in years. You've made this place better, not just with your hard work, but with your spirit. And I don't want that to end." Lila felt a warmth spread through her chest. She had never expected James to say anything like this. They had never rushed into anything, never put a label on their relationship. But now, hearing him speak so openly, she knew that the unspoken bond they shared had grown into something deeper than friendship. "I feel the same way," Lila replied, her voice steady, though her heart was racing. "I've never felt more at home than I do here. With you." James smiled, the expression lighting up his face. It wasn't a huge smile, but it was full of sincerity. A smile that reached his eyes and made Lila feel like she was truly seen. He reached for her hand, his touch warm and reassuring. "I've been thinking about the future a lot," he repeated, "and I want to build that future with you. Not just here on this farm, but in everything. I want to make a life together, a life that we create side by side." Lila's heart swelled as she looked at him. She had never imagined that she would find herself in this place. A year ago, she had been abandoned, lost, and alone in the world, unsure of what her future held. And now here she was, sitting by a fire with a man who had given her more than just shelter. He had given her a new life, a chance at happiness and a future that was full of possibilities. "I want that too," Lila said, her voice soft but filled with certainty. "I want to build a life with you, James. I want to share everything with you, the good, the bad, and everything in between." James squeezed her hand, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. They simply sat there, side by side, letting the warmth of the fire and the silence between them speak louder than any words could. It was a moment of understanding, a moment when everything that had once felt uncertain now seemed clear. The days that followed were filled with a quiet joy. Lila and James continued to work together, building their future one step at a time. There was no rush, no need to hurry. They took each day as it came, finding happiness in the small moments. Whether it was picking fresh vegetables from the garden, sitting together at the end of a long day, or simply enjoying each other's company in the silence of the evening. Their life wasn't perfect, but it was theirs. It was a life built on love, trust, and the understanding that they didn't need anything more than each other to be happy. The farm was no longer just a place where they worked. It was a place where they grew, where they learned to trust, and where they found peace. As the seasons continued to change, Lila realized that she had found more than just a place to call home. She had found a partner, a companion who would be with her through everything that the future held. Together, they had built a life that was strong and full of promise. And no matter what challenges might come their way, Lila knew that as long as they had each other, they would always find a way to overcome them. And so, with the stars shining brightly above and the quiet farm around them, Lila and James looked forward to a future that was no longer defined by the past, but by the life they were creating together.